this man has been a crusader to end voter suppression in this country. He has a book called Us the Ballot, The Modern Struggle for Voting Rights in America. Let me welcome journalist extraordinaire, Mr. Ari Berman. Welcome.
Hey, Karen, how you doing? I always like those introductions. Thank you.
Well, I mean, listen, you roll up your sleeves every day, and you have been, like a constant drumbeat, warning us, and telling us this is what's happening. And before your eyes, you have literally watched the erosion of voting rights back to almost 1950s, 60s era before we had an actual Voting Rights Act. What are you seeing? What are you seeing, and how horrible is it?
It is really bad. I mean, I've been covering this issue for a decade now, and things are heading in a direction that's beyond what I ever thought we'd see in our lifetime. We are heading back into a pre-Voting Rights Act America, where communities of color that got the right to vote are being disenfranchised. They're seeing their representation rolled back. Candidates are running for office basically trying to steal elections. And so it's a very, really worrisome where things are headed right now. And we're running out of time to do something about it before it's too late.
Now, Joe Madison, who hosts the Joe Madison Show right here on Sirius XM Channel 126 Urban View, where talk empowers and becomes action. He has been on a hunger strike. I think this is day 35 or 36. And, every day I pray for this man because, like he said, he's not doing it for himself. He's doing it for his grandchildren. And it is stunning to me that this is not crucial. Do you know what I'm saying? It feels like it should be crucial for folk to do something. What is it going to take? I'm at my wit's end. I've used the 5 Calls Act. We've reached out to people. We've done all of the things, and I'm like, Jesus, what is it going to take? Day 36, Joe Madison's on a hunger strike, and I don't know what to do to get them to come back to pass this.
Well, it's really amazing what Joe is doing, and I want to commend him and send him my best wishes. There's also a bunch of, I think, 20 students now from Arizona are on a hunger strike as well, and they're in the Capitol. So people are trying to dramatize for the country what is happening. We don't see the same kind of things we saw in the 1950s and 1960s anymore, right? People aren't being beaten on bridges in the same kind of way. People aren't being attacked with dogs in the same kind of way. And so people are trying to raise the collective anger at what's happening to our democracy, because it's not one thing that's happening right now. It's death by 1,000 cuts. It's gerrymandered maps here. It's voter suppression laws there. It's election subversion laws here. It's not one thing that's happening. It's a million little things that are happening, all of which adds up to a democratic emergency. And people have to understand that. And I think that the real frustration here is that, the Democrats should understand this threat and act with the same kind of urgency. But there's been this asymmetry throughout the last year where Republicans are doing everything they can to try to rig elections, but Democrats aren't doing everything they can to try to protect elections. And Republicans are basically trying to freeze Democrats out from ever winning elections, but you have a few Democratic holdouts in the Senate that are saying we need Republicans to support any kind of voting rights bill. Well, why would Republicans support voting rights legislation when they are the ones that are trying to undermine voting rights in state after state after state? And so I think that there needs to be a sense of urgency from the Democrats here to understand this is the greatest threat to American democracy that we face right now, and that they're running out of time to do anything about it. We have elections next year, but really the election cycle is already beginning. And once, the clock strikes midnight on December 31st, I mean, we're in an election year. And so the Congress has a very, very, very short window to act. I mean, I've been a broken record on this. I've been saying time is running out for months now, and time is really, really running out. And for the Congress to push voting rights into the next year, it just raises the question of, will they pass anything? And if they do pass anything, will it be in time to actually solve the problem?
And don't they get, especially the Democrats who have the House, the presidency, and technically the Senate, although Sinema and Manchin leave a lot to be desired as Democrats. They should be able to push through things and not have a lame duck presidency the way Barack Obama had in his term, midterm, when they lost the House and the Senate during his midterm, and then he couldn't get anything done, including sit a Supreme Court justice. Like, he couldn't even sit a Supreme Court justice with 8 months left. So I think about that, Ari Berman, and I wonder, let's take Stacey Abrams as a case study. Stacey Abrams lost her governor's election. I'm putting up air quotes because she didn't really lose. It was a voter. That was the example of what voter suppression and throwing people off the ballots, what that looks like. Stacey Abrams lost in Georgia. She decided, all right, I'm going to go out and register more people than you could ever throw off. And I believe because of her efforts, and then you have Black Voters Matter, Cliff and Latosha, and a bunch of other, Higher Heights and Glenda and them. You have a lot of organizations all over the country registering people to vote and then getting people to the ballots. And then Georgia turned blue. We got Biden, we got Warnock and Ossoff out of a state that was typically red. Now Stacey Abrams is running for governor. What's the impact of that work that she's done, and how much of it can be undone in this next cycle because of what you just said, that we're heading into apartheid rule?
Well, I think what Stacey understands is that this is a process, that her loss led to gains in 2020, and I think made it easier for her to be able to win in 2022. But there are some really serious obstacles in front of her candidacy, in front of Raphael Warnock's candidacy, in front of Democrats running in a lot of different states, which is that the laws have been changed to make it harder to vote. You have Republicans changing how elections are run and administered, which is perhaps the most disturbing part of all of this, that even if Stacey were to win, they might decide not to certify her election in some places, which is what they wanted to do in 2020.
Wait, what does that mean?
Well, what it means is that in a number of Republican-controlled counties, they have changed their county board of elections to basically kick Democrats, particularly Black Democrats, off of these election boards and make them all Republican election boards. And these election boards are the ones who certify the election results. And so this is a crisis that's unfolding before our eyes. They're not just changing the laws in terms of how you vote. They're changing who counts the votes themselves. And I think people need to understand.
So in 2020 in Georgia, it was Brad Raffensperger who certified that state for Biden, Warnock, and Ossoff. He's no longer in that seat. Instead, there's somebody who I think is Trump and Klan adjacent, if I'm not mistaken, right? And so Stacey Abrams could win by millions of votes, and that Secretary of State or that person who certifies elections could say, we don't believe it.
Well, the Secretary of State wasn't in charge of certifying the election, but he was in charge of the state board of elections, which oversaw all elections in the state. And of course, he stood up to Trump when Trump told him to find 11,780 votes to nullify Biden's victory. Georgia Republicans passed a law this year saying that Raffensperger, who stood up to Trump, is no longer a voting member and no longer chair of the state board of election, which would oversee any kind of election challenges. He is now facing a primary challenge from Jody Hice, a Republican member of Congress, who objected to certifying the election results and has spread Trump's conspiracy theory. So Raffensperger is still there, but he could lose his primary in May. And then he would still be Secretary of State, but he'd be a lame duck Secretary of State. And then it would be a general election between this person, Jody Hice, who is basically a far right Stop the Steal conspiracy theorist, and the Democratic nominee, who is likely to be a state rep named Bee Nguyen, who holds Stacey Abrams' old House seat. And so there's a lot of this stuff is going to come to a head in 2022. And I want people to understand, this is not going to be a typical off-year election. This is going to be an off-year election when democracy is at stake. Who we elect in 2022 is going to go a long way to deciding whether or not 2024 is going to be a free and fair election. Because people are saying, if Trump gets in 2024, we're never going to have another fair election. No, if Republicans take back power in 2022, we might never have another fair election. This election is going to decide what the election in 2024 looks like.
I'm struggling. Ari Berman is here. You can follow him at ARI Berman, BERMAN on the Twitters, and his book is Give Us the Ballot. I'm struggling with holding the Biden administration accountable at the same time, not using this platform to mortally wound them, because we need them, even if they're not doing all of the things that they need to do right now, because what you say is true. And seeing the future and always seeing around the corner, I'm like, y'all just get it together. You have this many months to get it together, the Biden administration. Listen, heed, please, because you're going to lose in 2022, which means we all lose. And then 2024 is a wrap. And then all of this goodness, because this is what I'm seeing, right? So when the infrastructure bill, now the money gets to these places, and bridges and tunnels and railways and schools and infrastructure and freaking broadband starts getting dispersed, then in comes Trump, or a Trump-like candidate, who will take credit for all of the goodness that this administration did, right? All the electric and all of the, the climate change stuff. It's going to take time for that money to trickle into these places for you to start seeing results. By then, he's going to be out of office, and then everyone's going to be living their best lives, and then the next guy's going to take credit for it. That's what I see happening.
Yeah. And I think that Biden is basically acting like we're in the normal course of politics, like it's 1987 or it's 1997 or it's 2007. It's not. We had an unprecedented attempt to try to overturn an election, followed by an insurrection, followed by Republicans doing whatever they can to try to achieve the means of the insurrection through other tactics. And that, to me, should have been the front and center emergency for the Biden administration. Obviously, COVID, other stuff was huge, but I don't want to say that other those things are under control. But now that they've done a lot of what they could do on those fronts, we have to understand preventing the kind of thing we saw in 2020 from ever happening again has to be the top priority. And yes, we need new roads. We need new bridges. Do we need those things right now? Or do we need to save our democracy right now? And if we don't save our democracy, are we going to have all those other things? Are we going to have good roads? Are we going to have good schools? Are we going to have good jobs if we don't have a functioning democracy? And I would argue no. And so I think they've prioritized the wrong issues, but I also think that they have not acted with the sense of urgency that the other side has. The other side says, we failed to steal the election, so we're going to do everything we can to steal the next one. And the other side, the Democrats, are not saying, okay, we didn't allow them to steal the election, but they could absolutely do it the next time, and therefore
so let's prevent it.
Let's prevent it from happening. And I just don't see that sense of urgency. Maybe things will change in the new year, but again, we've already lost an entire year here where they could have done something, and they haven't. And in the meantime, Biden has a lot less political capital now than he did back in the beginning of 2021, when I think they should have pushed this legislation to begin with.
You're absolutely right. Ari Berman, 866-801-8255. I identify Georgia as a battleground state. What other states can this audience look? Because we're all over the country. A lot of us are in North Carolina, Texas, California. Where else should give me 2 or 3 more states that we can do something about right now?
Well, I mean, the southern states are huge because the South is a microcosm of how America is changing. So I would say Texas, North Carolina, those other states that are Georgia-esque, that might not be quite where Georgia is, but are trending that direction. I would say those are places where there's really serious attacks on voting rights. Then I also say the upper Midwest is really, really critical. Not to be partisan, but there were Democratic governors in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania that prevented Republicans from doing a lot of bad things they wanted to do. All of those Democrats are up for re-election in 2022. And if Republicans get sole control of Wisconsin or Michigan or Pennsylvania, that's going to make it a lot easier for them to try to steal the 2024 election. So I would also urge people to pay attention to what's happening in the upper Midwest. In many ways, that was a firewall against election theft in 2020 that could change in 2022 and make it a lot easier to undermine democracy.
I apologize. Were those 3 states the states that allowed for Trump to beat Hillary Clinton? Were those 3 states among? Yeah. So
those 3 states.
So we've already seen this happen.
Arizona and Georgia were icing on the cake for Biden. He only needed Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania to win the election. And so it's kind of funny that he spent all this time trying to overturn the election in Georgia, which wasn't even essential to Biden's victory.
Bait and switch.
But
look over here.
But yeah, I mean, I would say that people really need to understand the impact of who the Secretary of State is, who governors are. One of the things that's really disturbing to me, which was just reported by the New York Times over the weekend, is Republicans are taking over all these local election boards, and people aren't even running for these jobs. And one of the things we saw in 2020 was this incredible grassroots mobilization for people to become poll workers, to become election workers, all of those things. And that was great. But unfortunately, a lot of those people went home, or they've been scared to do their job again. And I don't blame them because of what they've had to deal with from the insurrectionists. But the problem is the insurrectionists are now taking over the election machinery in this country, which is going to allow them to essentially legalize the means of the insurrection. They have gone from violence to infiltrating the system. It's sort of the equivalent of going from the Ku Klux Klan to the White Citizens Council. That's what they're doing right now.
Wow.
They're taking off the robes and they're putting on suits, but they have the same agenda that they had before. I think people really need to understand that.
Klan adjacent folk will be running your elections if you're not. So, it's nice to sit home, and it's nice to say, I don't have time. It's nice to say all of that, but do you have time to have rights? I mean, really, it's that dire right now. And I don't want to, act like Chicken Little here, but I see it. I see exactly what you see. I'm gonna need folk to run for these local voter election board seats. I'm gonna need y'all to vote because people are not running. So guess who's running? The people who have a stake in this to steal the election. We need to be equal, like you said, in our vigilance to make sure that they don't.